Earlier this year, the UK Parliament rolled out buffer zones around abortion clinics. They passed legislation around this. Where does the law currently stand?
Well, they are there. And I think it's very hard for nations in the West, for nations such as America and Great Britain, to imagine really that we've reached this far, apart from we have. So I think that those that are watching this will think, really, has Great Britain created a space where you are unable to speak quietly, unable even to pray, unable even to walk alongside a woman to explain another way when she's in and around an abortion clinic? Well, that's come to pass in the United Kingdom. You know, a nation which has always championed free speech, whose laws, whose anchor are absolutely anchored on freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, but also the freedom to protest, and those laws being interpreted and promoted very broadly. So this is something that has slipped in. It slipped in under another major act, the Public Order Act of this year, and it slipped in by way of an amendment. But it's actually one of the things that drives right through or tears up one of our fundamental constitutional principles around freedom to speak, freedom to protest, freedom to assemble.
How did this happen? Because these buffer zones, they were unfolding in a number of cities. I believe there were 5 cities that had them throughout the UK before this. How did it come to pass that those cities somehow translated into, oh, we need a national law to prevent people and also help us understand what is the distance around an abortion clinic where those activities can't happen?
Well, it's 150 meters. So you're not, so essentially, we are, no one is allowed to enter the area around an abortion clinic around 150 meters wide from any direction of that abortion clinic to speak to anybody that might be going in, to pray, to stand, to exist, to literally stand within that arena. They are now protected zones in this country. So I think that one of the things that's absolutely shocking and very clearly is this is that the ideological motivation of the pro-abortionists within Parliament and the way in which they pushed this through by an amendment to a bill where this was not going to be part of what was actually happening, was the way in which they did it. Just as they have in the last couple of years used every opportunity to weaken the law around abortion. So under the pretext of COVID, when we were all being shut down, that was a moment at which the abortion lobby came in and created access to pills by post abortion without a woman needing to go to a clinic, for instance. So we have seen a very well organized abortion lobby, but not just parliamentarians, the civil servants, and also the major players in terms of the major professional players. So I'm talking about the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the National Council of Midwives. These groups within the United Kingdom have been set upon actually liberalising the law in and around abortion at every point. And any pushback on this, they claim to be a violation. So one of the things that's been extraordinary in and around the clinics is this, that the abortion lobby has created this idea that peaceful campaigners, peaceful Christians, peaceful lovers of life are somehow a threat and intimidatory to the women that might enter these clinics. Well, of course, the truth on that is, Billy, that across these years, there have been no such intimidatory tactics by the people that are pro-life. If there had been, and they had been criminal, if there had been intimidation and harassment, then our criminal rules are already there to ensure that that wouldn't happen. So this
Harassment's
is
not legal, right? So if you were harassing somebody outside of an establishment, you would be held accountable for that.
that's it. That's exactly it. Yes.
So
Yes.
I have to ask you this because obviously, and you've handled this case, you're well acquainted with it, but Isabel Von Spruce arrested twice for silently praying. And,
Yes.
you know, the pro-choice side will say, oh, no, she wasn't arrested for praying silently. She was arrested for violating the buffer zone. But the reality was, based on the videos that we've seen, it appears she was simply praying silently when she was approached. So silent prayer, just to clarify this, is also a violation of these buffer zones.
That's absolutely right. And just to be clear with regard to the Izzy Vaughan Spruce case, we were involved in when she was seeking to challenge, by way of judicial review, the precursor to this clause 9 of the Public Order Act, which was the public spaces protection orders that were in and around the clinics in Birmingham and Bournemouth. And with Izzy, we brought a judicial review around that. It was the Alliance Defending Freedom that came in and helped her with regard to when she was arrested and held up for a criminal offence, yes, for silently praying.
I mean, so has this law now, the national version of this, you had these local regulations in a number of cities, has this taken effect nationally?
Yes, it has. It has actually taken effect. And so for the first time in this country, and I think that's where it has serious constitutional impact, and this is in a sense where I would like to warn those of you in America to ensure that these initially civil measures that get placed in and around certain buildings, so in and around abortion clinics, then take on a quasi-criminal force. There's also the political pressure that's applied around them. And then very quickly, as we can see, when certain bills go before Parliament or local legislators, it's really then quite easy to slip in an amendment which says there needs to be the protection of women in and around these spaces. And what becomes the protest? I mean, this is if I actually read the words of the act itself, for the purposes of subsection 1, so it's illegal to interfere with, which means to seek to influence, to persistently, continuously, or repeatedly occupy, to impede, to advise or persuade, or attempt to advise or persuade. So can we imagine that? So just even to advise or to attempt to advise.
I mean,
or
but I'm also thinking about the direction around the clinic, right? You may have other establishments, private establishments, public roads that, because it's within that space, that those are restricted areas, correct? Yes. Around that. I mean, that is so interesting to me. And I have to ask you, are there other establishments that are treated the same way in the UK? Are there churches, for instance? Are there other places that have the same treatment?
Right now, it absolutely is in and around the abortion clinics. I mean, that's going to be an interesting point of law. I mean, a resident of a home within the 150-metre buffer zone of an abortion clinic said, am I free to pray in my home? Am I free to have people come to my home or be in my garden and pray with regard to this? And so they have seen that anomaly, and we sought to test that, and they said, well, this gentleman wouldn't be arrested in his home, but we can see where it is going, and we can see that when the challenge is coming, then we'd have a court case on our hands.
So there are people, realistically, in positions where they are in their home or another place where a private business where they would technically be in violation for simply silently praying in their home even.
That's it.
Wow. So how do you move forward from here? You know, if you were, and obviously in the US, people who are watching or listening to this in America know the system, but how do you challenge this? Is there a way to challenge it? What does it look like moving forward if you were to try to dismantle this regulation?
We are continuing to challenge this legislation in principle. We're challenging the idea of buffer zones in principle. And I think that also we need to find our voice. And so we need to continue to do all that we can to speak truth, to speak life, to speak hope to the women that are in and around our clinics, to actually go as far as we can, wherever we can, to bring this message of hope to the women in the clinics. Our abortion statistics have just come out in the United Kingdom. And since the liberalisation that came about through COVID and the lack and less women in fact go into clinics, because now abortion can be accessed by pills by post, literally 2 pills through the post. We have seen a huge rise in the uptake of abortions in our nation. So we now have 500,000 abortions per year, 10.2 million abortions since the passing of the Act, which is the whole of London wiped out. And I think that just as this censorship has been brought in by those that are ideologically opposed to the protection of life, so we now must take back the ideological ground. We must actually speak publicly, speak bravely with regard to this, because the women that are accessing the abortion also have the right to hear of hope and life and another way. And we must never yield in being brave, in speaking the hope that we have.
Well, yeah, you're dealing with multiple issues here. You're dealing with the free speech issue, the religious freedom issue, but then you're also dealing with the fact that people are being deprived of other options and information, the women who are going through the doors of those clinics, by not being able to hear or even see somebody praying for them. I mean, my goodness, that to me is the part of this that is so bizarre, the silent prayer piece of this. All of the different elements of it are troubling, but that particular part, the fact that somebody could be standing within that buffer zone praying silently and be detained, seems unimaginable in 2023 in a modern country, but yet here we are.
Detained. And well, let me say this, in the this is with regard to the abortion issue, but we have, for years and years, we have been defending street preachers who have been detained. So men and sometimes women, but mainly men on the streets preaching in the United Kingdom, often locked up, put in a cell overnight. So there's a lot of that has been going on in the United Kingdom. So in and around the proclamation of the gospel, but this shift to criminalizing prayer outside an abortion clinic, so that you could be imprisoned for up to 6 months. And if you return to the space, imprisoned for up to 2 years. This is just not British. And I think that's what we've got to remember, that it's much more even than this. This is very serious, because the issue of abortion is very serious. Perhaps the most serious issue. But shutting down freedom to speak, freedom to be there, is, you're turning out the lights. You're turning out the lights in a nation. You're suppressing. It's the suppression of speech. Only one form of speech, only one form of ideology is acceptable. And unless you conform, we actually will imprison you. We will bring a police car, bring you to the police station, possibly hold you at least overnight. That's what happens to the street preachers. And then maybe release you. But you can see where this is going unless we push back. Let me say that it was some 27 years ago or so. I lived in Atlanta for 2 years. And this was for the first time ever, being a Brit, growing up as a Brit in the 1980s. I hadn't really seen any ministry, any pro-life ministry outside abortion clinics. Being very British, thought that seemed pretty hardcore, pretty American. Then I got this amazing ministry called Women for Women, led by Karen Black, out of Perimeter Church in Atlanta, was doing this work in downtown Atlanta. And I signed up for my first week. No one was more surprised than me. Was down in downtown Atlanta. I saw women the first time I was there, after being trained, the first time I was there, I saw women turn away from the abortion clinic. And 8 or 9 months later, we were saying hello to their babies. And now, 26, 27 years on, I know those young men and women. I was assigned to 3 of them. This is just glorious good news, glorious hope.
And you keep in touch. You keep in touch with them?
Yes. And one woman, Karen Black, who was running that ministry, has saved thousands of men and women through being able to go a lot to that down to these clinics, because women and mums and dads that are entering those doors, some of them just want somebody to say, "We're for you. We're for your baby. We'll look after you."
And it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You need to hear that.
It's just going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And not society driving them to the answer is abortion. The answer is to eradicate this problem, because of course we know it doesn't eradicate the problem.
Absolutely. How did that, I have to ask you, because now you shared that before we go, how did that experience in Atlanta shape the rest of the work that you do now?
Well, I got radicalized in a good way. I got brave, because I could see that, because if we could be there, if we could be the hope, if we could say it will be okay, if we can bring Jesus to that space, if we can bring life and light and hope and healing and the message of the gospel and have the courage to do it, then lives are changed. And lives are changed, on earth as it is in heaven. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And that's why to shut down our very ability to be close to an abortion clinic shuts out the hope of the gospel. It shuts out the hope of the gospel, the light of Christ, the life of Christ. And it really is an attack on the gospel, fundamentally, attack on the hope that the gospel brings.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today, sharing your story. I look forward to having you on again very soon.
Thank you for the opportunity. Great to be with you.